Hi everyone, welcome back to the Murder Tapes podcast, season 3, episode 9. Wilson and I spent our weekend packing and moving into our new apartment. We had our family come over and help, which was really nice. And I'm currently filming this episode in my closet because we do not have a setup area yet for the podcast because I need the sound to be perfect, and the closet just always seems to do the trick. Aside from that, it is so nice to have an office to work out of, and I'm currently trying to figure out how to decorate in order to make some videos for these episodes, because I really want it to look like a studio. Aside from that, I hope you all had a great weekend, and let's get into today's episode. Today we're going to be talking about the Aurora theater shooting, and before we get into the episode, I just wanted to quickly mention that if you would like to donate to the victims and their families, you can do so on the 720 Foundation website. It'll be the first link in the show notes, and you can also sign up to volunteer for the annual fundraiser event that they do every year. The 720 Memorial Foundation remains dedicated to honoring those who lost their lives by serving as a resource and advocate for communities affected by mass tragedies. It's made up of victims' families, survivors, and individuals directly impacted by the theater shooting. The foundation actively supports and guides those facing similar hardships. James Egan Holmes was born on December 13, 1987, in San Diego, California. His father, Robert, is a mathematician and scientist who also holds degrees from Stanford University, UCLA, and UC Berkeley, while his mother, Arlene, is a registered nurse. He has one sister named Chris. James spent his childhood in Castroville, California, where he attended elementary school, and later in San Diego during high school. He participated in soccer and cross country, and regularly attended a local Lutheran church with his family, as noted by the church's pastor. In Aurora, James resided on Paris Street, in a one-bedroom apartment located in a building populated by other health studies students. In a rental application for another apartment, he described himself as quiet and easygoing. He left various digital traces, including a university email address and an old MySpace profile, a dating profile on Match.com, and a resume on Monster.com. Sources suggest that he may have engaged the services of prostitutes and left reviews on an online message board. In 2006, James interned at the Salk Institute for Biological Studies, where his task involved writing computer code for a project. His supervisor characterized him as stubborn, socially awkward, and uncommunicative. While he presented the project to fellow interns at the end of his internship, he did not complete it. James reflected on his stint at the Salk Institute in a college application essay, stating, quote, "I had little experience in computer programming, and the work was challenging to say the least. Nevertheless, I taught myself to program in Flash and construct a cross-temporal calibration model. Completing the project and presenting my model at the internship's conclusion was exhilarating." After graduating from Westview High School in San Diego in 2006, James attended the University of California, Riverside, also known as UCR, where he earned an undergraduate degree in neuroscience in 2010, graduating with the highest honors, and he was active in several honor societies, including Phi Beta Kappa and Golden Key. According to recommendation letters submitted to the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, also known as UIUC, he ranked in the top 1% of his class, with a GPA of 3.949. The letters praised him as a very effective group leader who actively participated in his education, demonstrating significant intellectual and emotional maturity. In 2008, James worked as a counselor at a residential summer camp in Glendale, California, catering to disadvantaged children aged 7 to 14, where he was responsible for 10 kids and encountered no disciplinary issues. In June 2011, he commenced his PhD studies in neuroscience at the University of Colorado Anschutz Medical Campus in Aurora. Records indicate he received a $21,600 grant from the National Institutes of Health, distributed in installments from July 2011 to June 2012. and a $5,000 stipend from the University of Colorado. Though he received an acceptance letter from UIUC with a $22,600 stipend and free tuition, he declined without providing a reason. Reviewers of the UIUC application recalled that he had included a photo of himself with a llama. In 2012, James's academic performance took a downturn, leading to poor scores on his comprehensive exam that spring. Although the university did not intend to expel him, he was in the process of withdrawing. Just 3 days after failing a crucial oral exam in early June 2012, he left the university without explanation. James was known to be an avid fan of superheroes, particularly Batman, and his apartment featured Batman-themed decorations. Actor Diggity Dave Aragon, known for the MTV show Pimp My Ride, reported that James called him twice in the month leading up to the shooting, showing interest in Aragon's film, The Suffocator of Sins, which revolves around a vigilante character. On May 10, 2012, James purchased 2 tear gas containers online. On May 22nd, James purchased a Glock 22 pistol from a Gander Mountain store in Aurora, followed by a Remington Model 870 shotgun on May 28th at Bass Pro Shops in Denver. On June 6th, he purchased handcuffs and a military battle first aid kit online. Just hours after failing his oral exam on June 7th, he acquired a Smith & Wesson M&P 15 semi-automatic rifle. On June 13th, he purchased a 100-round drum magazine for the rifle, plus more 30-round magazines, a laser sight for the handgun, and 2 weapon slings were all bought online. On June 17th, he bought 225 tactical targets plus a target stand. Then, on June 19th, a laser sight for the rifle, more ammunition magazines, and a holster for the handgun. On June 28th, he bought over 2,000 rounds of rifle ammunition online, and separately on that same day, June 28th, he bought a ballistic helmet online as well. On July 1st, he bought several packages of snap caps, which are blank ammunition, often used for training drills, and these were bought at Gander Mountain. On July 2nd, he bought ballistic leggings online, and then once again on that day, July 2nd, separately, he bought body armor for his neck, torso, and groin. On July 3rd, he bought pyrotechnic parts, including 6-inch firework shells, fuses, and a launch control box. On July 6th, he bought another .40 caliber Glock handgun, along with 200 rounds of rifle ammunition, 4 pounds of smokeless powder, and gun cleaning supplies at Bass Pro Shops. On July 14th, chemicals and materials used to make improvised explosives were bought at a store in Denver. Between May and July, James bought 4 guns and 6,295 rounds of ammunition, including 2,600 rounds for the handgun, 325 shells for the shotgun, and 3,370 rounds for the rifle. On June 25th, just weeks before the attack, James submitted an application to join a gun club in Byers, Colorado. Club owner Glenn Rockovich attempted to contact him about a mandatory orientation, but could only reach his voicemail. Glenn described James's voicemail as bizarre and guttural, advising his staff to alert him if James appeared, which he did not. In retrospect, Glenn noted that James's behavior reminded him of the Joker, indicative of someone trying to seem as unusual as possible. On July 20th, 2012, the shooting took place in Theater 9 at the Century 16 multi-complex operated by Cinemark, located at the Town Center at Aurora Shopping Mall. The address is 14300 East Alameda Avenue. According to police, the shooter purchased a ticket, entered the theater, and sat in the front row. Approximately 20 minutes into the film, he exited through an emergency door which he propped open. It is alleged that he then returned to his car, parked near the exit door, changed into protective clothing, and retrieved his firearms. About 30 minutes into the film, around 12:30 a.m., he re-entered the theater through the same exit. Dressed in black and wearing a gas mask, a loud-bearing vest, distinct from a bulletproof vest, a ballistic helmet, bullet-resistant leggings, a bullet-resistant throat protector, a groin protector, and tactical gloves, he was initially mistaken by many in the audience as part of a costume or promotional stunt. Some thought he might be playing a prank or involved in a special effects display for the film's premiere. He played techno music in his headphones at full volume. The shooter then threw 2 canisters that emitted gas or smoke, impairing the audience's visibility, causing throat and skin irritation, and triggering eye discomfort. He first fired a 12-gauge Remington 870 Express tactical shotgun at the ceiling, and then toward the audience. He also used a Smith & Wesson M&P-15 semi-automatic rifle with a 100-round drum magazine, which jammed after about 45 rounds. Lastly, he fired a Glock 22 .40 caliber handgun, targeting the back of the room and the aisles. A bullet from this weapon traveled through the wall, hitting 3 people in the adjacent Theater 8, which was also screening the same film. Witnesses reported that the multiplex's fire alarm system activated shortly after the attack began, prompting theater staff to evacuate Theater 8. One witness hesitated to leave, having heard a warning that there was a shooter in the lobby. The first 911 calls were made at 12:39 a.m. Police arrived within 90 seconds and discovered several .40 caliber handgun magazines, a shotgun, and a large drum magazine on the theater floor. Some reports of the shooting were made via social media rather than direct calls to emergency services. The initial responding officers decided to transport victims to hospitals in their squad cars rather than waiting for ambulances. At approximately 12:45 a.m., police apprehended the shooter, James Holmes, behind the cinema next to his car without resistance. According to federal authorities, James had dyed his hair orange and referred to himself as the Joker, though he later retracted his claim to news sources such as CBS's Face the Nation. Multiple firearms were found in the theater and his car, including another Glock 22 handgun. After his arrest, he was initially held at Arapahoe County Detention Center under suicide watch. The police interviewed over 200 witnesses and concluded that James acted alone with no evidence linking him to any large group or terrorist organization. Aurora police officer Justin Grizzle stood by the exit door to Theater 9, where a trail of blood marked the concrete. People surged out of the door, their screams for help echoing around him, while James Egan Holmes, the man accused of causing the chaos, sat handcuffed in a patrol car nearby. Moments earlier, when Justin asked James if there was anyone else with him, James responded with a smile. Like a smirk, Justin testified, during the first day of the preliminary hearing in James's murder case. Justin drew his gun, stepped over the semi-automatic rifle left by the shooter, and entered the theater. "I slipped," Justin said. "I almost fell down because all of the blood there." Justin's testimony, along with that of other Aurora officers who arrived at the theater early on July 20th, provided a harrowing account of the scene. Prosecutors aimed to demonstrate that there was enough evidence for James to stand trial on 166 counts of murder, attempted murder, and other charges related to the shootings at the Century Aurora 16 movie theater. Prosecutors meticulously detailed the victims' injuries, the locations where they were found, and the nature of their wounds. Officers described the chaos they encountered firsthand. Inside the theater, Justin's eyes and throat were burned by tear gas. An alarm blared, a strobe light flashed, and cell phones beeped. The film, The Dark Knight Rises, continued to play amidst the carnage. Justin saw bodies lying motionless. Sergeant Gerald Johnsgard, another officer who testified, recalled seeing terrified people huddled in the first 2 rows. The officers quickly developed a system to assist victims. Get them out of the theater, move those who could talk a few yards away from the exit to await treatment, and lay those who couldn't by the door for immediate help. Ambulances were unable to navigate the congested parking lot, and were held at a staging area. Consequently, Justin and other officers used their patrol cars to transport victims to the hospital. Justin did not hesitate. Quote, "After what I saw in the theater, I didn't want anyone else to die." Justin's voice was choked up. On his first trip to the hospital, Justin transported 2 people, Ashley Moser, who was bleeding from gunshot wounds to her torso, and another man whose name he never learned. Back inside the theater, an officer handed Sergeant Johnsgard the body of 6-year-old Veronica Moser Sullivan. Johnsgard checked for a pulse but found none. Despite this, she was rushed to the hospital. Justin made another trip to the hospital with 2 more victims and then returned for a 3rd trip with a man who had a gunshot wound to his head. Caleb Medley was barely breathing, and Justin testified that the sound of his labored breaths was the most god-awful sound. When the sound began to fade, Justin grew frantic. "Don't you die on me," Justin recalled shouting at Caleb when he could no longer hear him breathing. Justin was relieved when Caleb's breathing resumed. Caleb was taken to the University of Colorado Hospital, where doctors managed to save his life. Justin did not stop to find out the outcome. He went back to the theater for one more victim who was so covered in blood that Justin couldn't determine their age or gender. By dawn, blood covered Justin's patrol car floorboards, seat cushions, ceiling, dashboard, and headrests. Quote, "There was so much blood. I could hear it sloshing in the back of my car." Many officers faced challenges just getting their cars to the rear of the theater to pick up victims. Officer Aaron Blue, upon hearing the call for help, raced to his patrol car and maneuvered through the chaotic parking lot. He transported a young woman with gunshot wounds in her head and legs, sitting with her in the back seat while another officer drove. Quote, "Every time she moved, she stopped breathing," said Aaron. Aaron held her carefully in an attempt to keep her alive, but Jessica Gawi died at the hospital. After their testimony, several officers, including Justin, lingered outside the courtroom. When shooting survivors and their families came outside, the officers often smiled and extended their hands for a handshake or opened their arms for a hug. When apprehended, James informed the police that he had booby-trapped his apartment with explosive devices before heading to the movie theater. As a result, authorities evacuated 5 buildings surrounding his Aurora residence, located about 5 miles north of the cinema. The apartment complex is designated for University of Colorado Medical Center students, patients, and employees. The day following the shooting, officials disarmed an explosive device attached to the apartment's front entrance. A remotely operated robot was used to enter the apartment and neutralize additional explosives. Inside, they discovered more than 30 homemade grenades connected to a control box in the kitchen, as well as 10 gallons of gasoline. Neighbors reported hearing loud music from the apartment around midnight on the night of the massacre. One neighbor went to the door to inform James that she would be calling the police, noting that the door appeared to be unlocked, but deciding not to enter. A law enforcement official later revealed that a Batman mask was found inside the apartment. By July 23rd, police had completed evidence collection from the apartment. Residents of the 4 nearby buildings were allowed to return 2 days later, and those living in the formerly booby-trapped apartment building were permitted to move back in 6 days after the incident. At the time of his arrest, he identified as a laborer. James's defense claimed that he was a psychiatric patient. Following the defense's motion, a judge mandated the information be redacted. Later, reports indicated that James met with at least 3 mental health professionals at the University of Colorado before the shooting. One of his psychiatrists expressed concern over James's mental health before the tragedy, fearing he could be a danger. Dr. Lynn Fenton reported to campus police a month prior to the incident that he exhibited homicidal tendencies. Despite treating him as a patient, she opted not to hospitalize him following his violent remark. There was also indications from acquaintances that they perceived James as potentially violent. Notably, he sent a text to a graduate student just 2 weeks before the shooting, inquiring about dysphoric mania and warning the student by saying, quote, "Stay away from me because I am bad news." Initially, James was held at the Arapahoe Detention Center under suicide watch and placed in solitary confinement as a precaution due to the high-profile nature of his case. James made his first court appearance in Centennial, Colorado on July 23rd before Judge William B. Sylvester, where he was informed of his rights and denied bond. The judge issued a mandatory protection order and appointed a public defender. James remained silent and did not make eye contact with the judge, appearing dazed and confused, raising concerns about his mental state. On July 30th, prosecutors formally charged James with 24 counts of first-degree murder, 116 counts of attempted murder, possession of explosives, and inciting violence. The numerous charges expanded the avenues for prosecution. For each victim, he faced one count of murder with deliberation and another for murder with extreme indifference. In court, James agreed to waive his right to a preliminary hearing. On August 9th, his attorneys indicated that James was mentally ill and required more time to evaluate his condition. Daniel Recht, a Denver attorney, explained that having different counts benefits the prosecution because if a jury acquits James under one theory, it could still convict him under another. Daniel noted that extreme indifference is arguably a much easier mental state for the prosecution to prove. In a statement issued after the hearing on behalf of the family of shooting victim Jonathan Blanc, his cousin Jessica Watts expressed confidence that the district attorney's office would pursue all applicable charges against James. Quote, "He will be held accountable for his actions, and we, Johnny's family, will continue to mourn the hole we now have in our lives." The charging document unsealed after the hearing revealed that James is accused of one count of murder after deliberation and one count of murder with extreme indifference for each of the 12 victims. The attempted murder charges follow a similar pattern. The document listed survivor Bonnie Kate Porcio twice, once as Bonnie Kate and once as Bonnie Porcio, leading to some confusion that officials at the district attorney's office were unable to clarify due to a gag order. Quote, "Because of the gag order, our office is unable to interpret the charging document at this time," said Casimir Spencer, a spokeswoman for District Attorney Carol Chambers. The charging document also included names of some survivors who were not physically injured, while omitting names of some who were wounded. Daniel suggested that attempted murder charges are valid for those shot at but not hit. He added that prosecutors likely made their charging decisions after consulting with victims and aimed to avoid overcharging James with less significant crimes like aggravated assault. Quote, "Clearly the prosecution decided they need to keep this to the most serious charges," Daniel said. "They wanted to keep the jury from getting confused with potentially hundreds of counts. The charges may be amended in the future." In the audience, dozens of shooting survivors and family members of victims watched closely, some leaning forward or craning their necks to observe James. Shooting survivor Rita Paulina, with her wrist, arm, and leg bandaged, fidgeted with her gauze and rested her arm awkwardly on her seat. The same could not be said for the victims and their families in the courtroom. Their faces bore the weight of the day's testimony. Some victims left during the hearing, unable to endure most of the painful details. Others wiped away tears or clenched their faces and arms during the most harrowing moments. Quote, "I would at least like to know what happened and get some details so we can understand," Tom Teves, whose son Alex was killed in the shooting, told 9 News. For many, attending the hearing was a challenging decision. Sam Sudani said he came because his daughter Farah, who was seriously injured in the attack, wanted to be there. They listened as a detective described how Farah was shot. Quote, "Because she decided to come, I wanted to hold her hand," Sam Sudani told 9 News. Quote, "No more, no less. I personally, honestly don't want to be here." Sandy and Lonnie Phillips, the mother and stepfather of slain victim Jesse Gawi, shared a similar sentiment. Though they were attending a conference in North Carolina on Monday, Lonnie Phillips said in a statement that even if they could have been there, they wouldn't have attended. Quote, "It's been a bad day," Lonnie Phillips said in the statement. "It's too much emotional turmoil. My wife cried just reading a text about it." Monday's session of the hearing concluded with a detective methodically reviewing a list of victims he had interviewed, detailing their injuries, seating locations in the theater, and their observations. Earlier in the day, another detective used a photograph of Theater 9 to pinpoint the exact locations where each deceased victim was found. 3 victims were located in row 8, just behind the aisle separating the ground level seats from those elevated in a stadium style. 1 victim was discovered in each of rows 10, 11, 12, 13, 16, and 18. Additionally, 1 victim was found beside the stairs leading to the top seats. The testimony presented a stark clinical overview of the tragedy, stripping it down to a list of cold facts. Denver defense attorney Pete Hedin noted that the defense team might raise competency issues given potential mental health concerns, which could delay the trial. Once competency is raised, the trial clock stops while the defendant undergoes psychological evaluations. Pete predicted that even an expedited process could take 3 to 5 months. Quote, "Certainly the indications are that this guy is seriously mentally ill. It'll be interesting at which point they will raise the competency issue." This disclosure was made at a court hearing in Centennial where media organizations sought to unseal documents related to the case. On September 19th, the prosecution requested to add 10 additional charges and amend 17 others, potentially raising the total to 152 counts. The following day, James appeared in court for the first time with cropped hair, revealing his natural brown hair color after having dyed it red. Court documents revealed on September 28th indicated that James had been barred from the University of Colorado campus due to threats made against a professor. The university stated this prohibition stemmed from his withdrawal from school. On October 11, 2012, James's attorneys requested a postponement of a preliminary hearing set for November, which was subsequently rescheduled for January 7th. On November 14, 2012, James's lawyers filed an emergency motion to delay a pretrial hearing, citing an unspecified condition that rendered him unable to attend court. The hearing was postponed until December, as reports emerged that James had made several so-called half-hearted suicide attempts in the days leading up to the scheduled hearing on November 15th. James returned to court on January 7, 2013, where recordings of 911 calls and videos from the theater were introduced as evidence. His defense team continued to assert his mental illness. On that day, reports indicated that investigators had seized 4 prescription bottles and immunization records from his apartment, although the specifics of the medications were not disclosed. Ultimately, a judge ruled in October that prosecutors could retain these items. On January 10, 2013, a judge determined that sufficient evidence existed for James to face trial on all charges. His plea hearing was set to be postponed until March 2013. On March 27, 2013, James's attorneys indicated he was prepared to plead guilty in exchange for avoiding the death penalty. The following day, prosecutors stated they were not ready to accept this plea, expressing skepticism about its sincerity. On April 1, 2013, prosecutors confirmed their intention to pursue the death penalty, outlining plans for a trial to commence in February 2014. On May 7th, James's attorneys notified the court of their intention for him to plead not guilty by reason of insanity, with this change slated for May 31st. On May 23, 2013, James's legal team argued that the state's rules regarding insanity pleas were unconstitutional. The judge addressed these constitutional concerns on May 29th, concluding that the laws in question did not violate the Constitution. On June 4, 2013, the presiding judge, Carlos Samore Jr., accepted James's plea of insanity as part of his defense. Carlos then asked if he had any questions, to which James replied no. Carlos then said, quote, "I find Mr. Holmes understands the effects and consequences of the not guilty by reason of insanity plea. He was looking at the advisement and appeared to be following along. The plea acceptance meant there would be court-ordered psychological tests in order to determine James's mental state. James's lawyers have repeatedly claimed he is mentally ill, but postponed the insanity plea while challenging the constitutionality of state laws. They argued that these laws could impede their defense if James's case were to advance to the stage where a jury decides on the possibility of execution. When the time came on Tuesday morning, delayed by half an hour due to some of James's attorneys being caught in traffic, they were unprepared and requested an additional month or two to consider their options. Attorney Daniel King explained that the defense team had not yet completed the psychiatric evaluations on James and needed more time to understand the legal ramifications of an insanity plea. Quote, "I don't think we can stand before you ethically and say we're ready to enter a plea," Daniel said. "The nature of the work we're doing is ongoing." The audience, including shooting victims and their families, sighed at Daniel's request, while prosecutors expressed their frustration. "They've had 8 months to get to this point," prosecutor Karen Pearson remarked. Judge William, the chief judge of the 18th Judicial District, was also visibly irritated by the defense's lack of clarity in requesting more time. Quote, "So how am I going to make an informed decision based on the limited information you're giving me, Mr. King?" said William. "If jurors find James not guilty by reason of insanity, he would be committed indefinitely to the state mental hospital. He could be released eventually if doctors determine his sanity has been restored, though this is considered rare. If James is convicted, a penalty phase would follow. Both the defense and prosecution could call witness to testify about factors influencing whether James should be executed or spared. The jury would then decide between the death penalty or a life sentence without the possibility of parole. Should the jury impose the death penalty, it would lead to appeals and other legal processes that could span years." James's parents, Robert and Arlene, sat next to a group of defense investigators, speaking little and mostly keeping their hands in their laps and eyes downcast. They looked up at their son as he entered the courtroom. After the hearing, shooting survivor Marcus Weaver expressed relief that William was moving the case forward. Quote, "Seeing James in the courtroom today, he is a human just like we all are. He does deserve a fair trial," said Marcus, who was shot in the arm. "There isn't a second that goes by that we don't feel the sting of his actions. Justice will be served in the end." Marcus believed most victims wanted the death penalty sought against James, but suggested that if James pleaded guilty, life imprisonment would be more appropriate. He noted that James appeared lucid during the hearing and did not seem insane. Quote, "To be honest, I saw a human being today. And you can plead guilty and own up to it, or you can plead not guilty and face serious consequences," said Marcus. Arapahoe County District Attorney George Broschler told William he would announce during the April 1st hearing whether he would pursue the death penalty. Meanwhile, James's attorneys have secured a subpoena for Jana Winter, a New York-based Fox News reporter, to testify at the April hearing about her sources. Jana had reported that a notebook James sent to his University of Colorado psychiatrist detailed a shooting plot. The defense argues this disclosure violated a gag order in this case. William also scheduled hearings for the week of May 13th to address motions and for July 25th to assess trial readiness. The trial is set to begin on August 5th, and it is expected to last at least 4 weeks, with prosecutors estimating it could take up to twice as long. Delays have become routine for the case. When James appeared at Tuesday's hearing, he had 3 options: plead not guilty and face a jury trial, plead guilty and proceed to a sentencing hearing, or plead insanity and undergo a court-ordered evaluation followed by a trial to determine his sanity. Instead, with inscrutable silence, James chose none of these options. Quote, "He's a hollow person. Very evil," said Jessica Watts, the cousin of slain theater victim Jonathan Blunk. "He's absolutely not insane. Just, he doesn't seem like he does a whole lot to help himself. He doesn't seem real interested in what's going on in his own future." 3 weeks later, on April 1st, District Attorney George Broschler declared that justice's death for James. Court documents reveal that the defense had previously proposed a guilty plea in exchange for a life sentence without parole, contingent on the district attorney removing the death penalty from consideration. William informed the defense that it could alter the plea to not guilty by reason of insanity, but would need to provide justification for the change. Judge Carlos took over the case from William in April. This tragedy is also the deadliest shooting in Colorado since the Columbine High School massacre on April 20th, 1999, and I will be covering this case very soon. It is also important to pay our respects to the victims, so I'm now going to list the names and ages of those who tragically had their life cut short during this tragedy. I'm also going to list some things about them. First is Jonathan T. Blunk. He was 26 years old. He served in the Navy for 5 years and had a 4-year-old daughter and a 2-year-old son. His wife, from whom he has separated, lives in Reno, Nevada, and Mr. Blunk was at the movie with his girlfriend Jansen Young, who told the Today Show that he died protecting her from the shooter. Quote, "John just took a bullet from me," Miss Young said in the interview. Mr. Blunk left the Navy about a year and a half ago after serving on an aircraft carrier for 5 years, and he worked installing hardwood flooring, his father said. He was trying to re-enlist in the service. Quote, "He was just a really great person." Quote, "He was into four-wheel driving like I am. He had a Jeep. He was an outdoorsy type person," said his father. Next, there's Alexander J. Bollock, aged 18. Known as AJ, he attended Gateway High School in Aurora. He was accepted at the Rocky Mountain College of Art and Design, where he had planned on attending classes in the fall. According to a statement by his family, he had hoped to become an art teacher and open his own studio. His family described him as a talented young man who enjoyed baseball, making pottery, and music. Quote, "His classmates remembered him as funny and outgoing in the tributes that filled status updates on Facebook and posts on Twitter. On Tumblr, one classmate wrote that he was a wonderful friend and person to be around. From orchestra to banquets to graduation parties and many more memories after high school. Your loving, caring, talented, and freaking hilarious self will be missed, but your spirit lives on in your friends and family." Next is Jess Childress, age 29. Staff Sergeant Jess Childress was 29 years old from Thornton, Colorado, and was an Air Force reservist on active duty with the 310th Forces Support Squadron at Buckley Air Force Base, according to Air Force officials. Next is Gordon Cowden, age 51. On the night of the shooting, Gordon W. Cowden had taken his 2 teenage children to the movies, according to the Denver Post. The 2 teenagers were not injured, and in a statement, his family called him a true Texas gentleman who loved life and his family. He was an outdoorsman and small business owner with a keen sense of humor who traveled the world. Quote, "He will be remembered for his devotion to his children and for always trying his best to do the right thing, no matter the obstacle," said his family. Jessica Gawi was 24 years old. Nearly 2 months earlier, Jessica escaped a shooting at the Eaton Center in Toronto, where 2 people were killed and several others were injured. Enthusiastic and confident, Jessica Gawi was a college student pursuing a career in sports radio. She worked as an intern at a Denver radio station over the summer and planned to apply for more internships in the fall. Her brother, Jordan Gawi, immediately flew to Aurora to act as her next of kin and left messages of mourning on social media. Quote, "Let us remember the names of the victims and not the name of the coward who committed this act," he said on Twitter. Petty Officer 3rd Class John Larimer joined the Navy the previous summer and was a cryptologic technician. He was stationed in Aurora since October and was one of 5 children and grew up in Crystal Lake. Quote, "We're still in shock," his father said. "Unfortunately, in the military, you expect him to be in harm's way, but not in a theater." The Navy released a statement on Saturday from Petty Officer Larimer's commander, Commander Jeffrey Jabowski. Quote, "I am incredibly saddened by the loss of Petty Officer John Larimer. He was an outstanding shipmate, a valued member of our Navy team. He will be missed by all who knew him. My heart goes out to John's family, friends, and loved ones, as well as to all the victims of this horrible tragedy." The next victim was Matthew Robert McQuinn, age 27, who died shielding his longtime girlfriend, Samantha Yowler, who was shot in the knee and hospitalized. Matthew was a 2004 graduate of Vandalia Butler High School in Vandalia, Ohio. He is originally from Springfield, Ohio. Matthew and Miss Yowler, who had been dating since March 2009, moved to Colorado last year and took jobs at Target. Miss Yowler's brother, Nick Yowler, lives in Colorado. He had accompanied the couple to the movie screening and escaped uninjured after also shielding his sister and pulling her from the theater. Next is Michaela Medic, who was 23 years old. She worked at a Subway sandwich shop and took classes at the Community College of Aurora. She went by Kayla and was outgoing and had a good group of friends. Her aunt, Jennifer Zakovich, said, quote, "She was working at a Subway trying to figure out what she wanted to do with her life. She was her dad's best friend. She and her sister were inseparable." Next is Veronica Moser Sullivan, age 6. 6-year-old Veronica Moser Sullivan, who lived in Denver, had just started swimming and had fallen in love with it, said her cousin, Catherine Young. Quote, "She was really good at it. I taught her to longboard, so she loved doing that too. She was just a radiant, happy little girl. She was just so happy. She could brighten anyone's day. She was really young, just a happy girl." Veronica's mother, Ashley Moser, was also seriously wounded. She was shot twice in her abdomen and once in the neck. Ashley was in the process of starting nursing school and suffered a miscarriage a week after the attack. The youngest victim injured in the shooting was just 3 months old. The next victim was Alex Sullivan, aged 27. He attended the midnight movie to celebrate his 27th birthday. His family would say, quote, "The Sullivan family lost a cherished member of their family today. Alex was smart, funny, and above all, loved dearly by his friends and family." In the hours after the shooting on Friday, Mr. Sullivan's father could be seen on local television channels. He went from camera to camera holding up a black and white polo of his son, begging for help in finding him. Quote, "Somebody find him and call us. Today is his birthday, for God's sake." In a blog post, Ryan Frost, a friend, remembered meeting him at a comic book event in Denver in June. Mr. Sullivan's friends called him Sully, and he was a huge fan of comic books, Mr. Frost wrote. "We joked about how our wives put up with our comic books and all of our other nerdy stuff." The next victim is Alexander C. Teeves, age 24. Alexander had just graduated with a master's degree in counseling psychology and was going back to school for a doctorate in physical therapy. He thought he could help even more people that way, said his girlfriend Amanda Lindgren. They liked to adventure, heading out of town to see a country show or some such event. They also had fun closer to home, hanging out in their apartment talking or going on a pool date to their building's swimming pool. They were together in the theater when the shooting broke out. Mr. Tebbs pulled Miss Lindgren down and wrapped his arms around her head, shielding her. Quote, "He was my angel that day. He saved me," Miss Lindgren said, "and he's been my angel since the day I met him." The next victim was Rebecca Wingo, who was 32 years old and a single mother with 2 daughters. She took classes at Aurora Community College and attended Mile High Church in Lakewood, Colorado. One of her friends from church who put teddy bears in her honor at a memorial for the victims, Gail Rifle, said, quote, "She was a lovely young woman." The injured were treated at several facilities, including Children's Hospital Colorado, Denver Health Medical Center, the Medical Center of Aurora, Parker Adventist Hospital, Rose Medical Center, Swedish Hospital, University Hospital, and a makeshift hospital set up at the scene. On July 25th, 3 of the 5 hospitals treating victims announced they would either limit or completely forgive medical bills. The Community First Foundation raised over $5 million to support victims and their families. In September, surveys were distributed to gauge preferences for the distribution of funds, whether equally among victims or based on a needs assessment process. On November 16, 2012, the Aurora Victim Relief Fund announced that each claimant would receive $220,000. The evening following the shooting, a candlelight vigil placed at the site in Colorado. The evening following the shooting, a candlelit vigil took place at the site in Colorado. President Barack Obama directed that flags at government buildings be flown at half-staff in honor of the victims until July 25th. Both Obama's and Mitt Romney's campaigns paused television advertising in Colorado for the 2012 presidential election. On July 22nd, President Obama met with victims, local officials, and state leaders and delivered a nationally televised address from Aurora. In response to the tragedy, numerous world leaders extended their condolences. Warner Brothers, the distributor of the Dark Knight Rises film, expressed profound sorrow over the shooting and took immediate action in response. The studio canceled the film's gala premieres in Paris, Mexico, and Japan, and scaled back its marketing efforts in Finland, and choose not to release box office figures for the movie until July 23rd. Some television ads for the film were also pulled. Other major studios followed Warner Brothers' lead by withholding early box office numbers on July 21st. It was announced that Warner Brothers would make a substantial donation to Colorado's Community First Foundation to support the victims. Christopher Nolan, the film's director, described the event as savage and devastating on behalf of his cast and crew. Christian Bale, who plays Batman, privately visited victims on July 24th. Members of the Colorado Rockies and the Denver Broncos also reached out to the victims, with some visiting them in the hospital. In response to the shooting, Warner Brothers instructed cinemas to stop showing a trailer for the film Gangster Squad, which featured a scene of characters shooting at a movie theater audience with machine guns. The release date for the film was postponed to January 2013, and the controversial scene was replaced. DC Comics delayed the release of Batman Incorporated #3, which included a scene of a female villain brandishing a handgun in a classroom, and Warner Brothers Animation decided to edit the upcoming Beware the Batman series to make firearms appear less realistic. Hans Zimmer, who composed the film's soundtrack, recorded a choral piece titled Aurora in tribute to the victims. Cinemark committed to covering any funeral expenses for the victims' families not met by the Crime Victims Compensation Fund. The Century Aurora 16 multiplex, where the shooting occurred, was closed temporarily but reopened on January 17, 2013, with a 40-minute ceremony led by Aurora Mayor Steve Hogan. Following the shooting, there was a significant increase in security at theaters across the United States and globally. In New York City, police were deployed to theaters screening the film. The National Association of Theater Owners issued checklists from the U.S. Department of Homeland Security to its members, emphasizing the importance of working closely with law enforcement. The National Association of Theater Owners issued checklists from the U.S. Department of Homeland Security to its members, emphasizing the importance of working closely with local law enforcement and reviewing security procedures. AMC Theaters announced new security measures, including banning costumes that could make other guests uncomfortable and prohibiting face-covering masks and fake weapons. Security Director News suggested in a July 23rd article that the incident could prompt theaters to adopt more stringent security measures, potentially transforming security protocols across the country. Following the shooting, legal experts noted the significant challenges victims and their families would face in pursuing civil liability claims against the theater or other parties. On September 21, 2012, 3 victims filed a lawsuit against Cinemark in the U.S. District Court for the District of Colorado. They alleged that the company was negligent for failing to provide adequate safety and security measures, asserting that, quote, readily available security procedures, equipment, and personnel would likely have prevented or deterred the gunman from carrying out his attack on the theater's patron. In response, Cinemark filed a motion to dismiss the case on September 27, 2012, arguing that Colorado law did not hold them liable for failing to prevent an unforeseeable criminal act. Cinemark's motion referenced a landmark California appellate decision, which ruled that McDonald's was not responsible for preventing the 1984 San Ysidro McDonald's massacre. On October 30, 2012, the court handling the criminal case against James denied a motion for some survivors seeking access to sealed evidence for their civil case against Cinemark. On January 24, 2013, a federal magistrate judge recommended dismissing most of the claims as they were not supported by Colorado law, although claims related to violations of the Colorado Premises Liability Act could continue. On January 14, 2013, Chantel Blunk, the widow of victim Jonathan Blunk, filed a lawsuit against the University of Colorado in federal court. She alleged that a school psychiatrist could have prevented the attack by detaining James after he had admitted to, quote, fantasizing about killing a lot of people. This type of lawsuit had been anticipated in an August 2012 article co-authored by bioethicist Arthur Kaplan, which explored how the landmark California Supreme Court decision in Tarasoff versus Regent of the University of California, 1976, might apply to the Aurora shooting. In the days following the attack, several incidents involving threats and suspicious activities at or near screenings of The Dark Knight Rises film led to arrests across the U.S. On July 22nd in Norwalk, California, a man was arrested for making criminal threats after yelling, quote, "Does anyone have a gun?" and "I should go off like in Colorado," at a Dark Knight Rises screening. On the same day in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, a man faced criminal charges following a fight in a cinema restroom. During the altercation, someone shouted "gun," causing panic among moviegoers at a Dark Knight Rises screening. On July 23rd in San Jose, California, an individual threw a package into a theater showing The Dark Knight Rises film and allegedly claimed it was a bomb, prompting an evacuation. Also on July 23rd in Sierra Vista, Arizona, a confrontation between a moviegoer and an intoxicated man with a backpack led to mass hysteria and the evacuation of 50 people from a The Dark Knight Rises screening. On August 4th in Westlake, Ohio, a man was arrested after bringing several weapons into a The Dark Knight Rises screening. He was later sentenced to 6 months in prison. Following the shooting, gun sales in Colorado surged, with background checks for firearm purchases increasing to 2,887. An increase of 43% from the previous week. Sales also rose in Washington, Florida, California, and Georgia. The incident reignited debates over gun control, focusing on issues like James's access to semi-automatic rifles and high-capacity magazines, which had been federally banned from 1994 to 2004. However, a survey released by the Pew Research Center on July 30th, 2012, indicated that the shooting did not significantly alter Americans' views on gun control. In pressing the case against James Egan Holmes, accused of one of the worst mass shootings in American history, Arapahoe County prosecutors demonstrated they were leaving nothing to chance. James faced a total of 142 criminal counts, including 2 separate murder charges for each of the 12 people who died in the July 20th attack at the Century Aurora 16 theater. These charges are based on different legal theories, one for deliberate murder and one for murder. These charges are based on different legal theories, one for deliberate murder and one for murder with extreme indifference. Prosecutors also filed 2 counts of attempted murder for each of the 58 individuals injured during the attack, which occurred at an early morning premiere of The Dark Knight Rises film. In total, James faced 141 felonies, 24 counts of first-degree murder, 116 counts of attempted murder, and 1 count of possession of an explosive device. Additionally, James was also charged with 1 sentence enhancer count for allegedly committing a crime of violence. At the beginning of the episode, I mentioned the 720 Foundation that is made up of the victims and their families. Tina Marie Coons is affiliated with the Memorial Foundation, and her son survived the shooting. She explains that they distribute paper cranes with messages of encouragement to communities recovering from violence. Quote, "We always include a letter offering our support and inviting them to reach out if they have any questions about creating a memorial or need assistance. I believe that communities can uplift each other, and that's what we need to focus on." Each year, the foundation hosts an annual fundraiser centered around the memorial, which serves as the focal point of Aurora's Waterwise Garden. Those links to sign up, volunteer, and donate will be available in the show notes, and they will also be linked. Those links to sign up, volunteer, and donate will all be available in the show notes. Anyone that knows me knows I love going to the movies almost every weekend, and I often talk about it in this podcast, how often I go. Something about it is just so exciting. However, now every time I go, I get paranoid and always feel like I have to watch my surroundings and look for exits. I could not imagine the fear the victims felt with nowhere to go, the lights being low, and the loud movie playing. It is so unfortunate that we have to constantly be alert in places that we go to relax and spend time with those we love. It's absolutely tragic, and my heart goes out to each victim and their family. There are 5 long interviews a psychiatrist recorded with James that will be linked in the show notes, along with photos and other evidence. I would have added them in the episode as I always do, but the footage is very, very long. So if you are interested in watching those, they are also in the show notes. Feel free to also follow our Instagram at Murder Tapes Podcast, and if you're interested, my personal is at Annalisa. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope to see you on the next one.